So now we move to Philip Barnes. Philip works for Barratt, Land and Planning Director, and a slightly different perspective again.
Thanks, Chair. Really pleased to be here today. Thanks for the invite. If only for the fact it's my first day back from 2 weeks leave, so I've managed to avoid doing any real work for another day. The bad thing about that, though, is I didn't have time to prepare a presentation. But the good thing is, when you're on holiday, you do have time to reflect on how you're going to answer a question, how do you solve the housing crisis in 15 minutes? And obviously the first thing you do is you say, well, it's easy, just find out who's the cause of it, who's to blame, and then sort them out. But then I thought, hang on, well, house builders, we get told we're to blame. Social landlords, 2 years ago, you were getting told you were to blame. Planners, they always get told they're to blame. Landowners, they are, as we've heard today, they are really in their headlights at the moment as being the cause of the blame. NIMBYs are always cited as the cause of the blame. And land promoters are now increasingly cited as being the cause of the blame. So that made me think, well, actually, a better thing is to reflect on what really is the problem. And it's a lack of leadership. It's a lack of political will. So all I'm going to talk about today is what are we doing between words, actions, and outcomes at the national political level, and what are we doing between words, actions, and outcomes at the local level. And then I'm going to give you my 3 ideas for solving the housing crisis. First thing I'm going to stress, though, is I'm here to give you a house builder perspective, not the house builder perspective. House builders are very different. I can only give you the Barratt perspective. We've grown our volume by 55% in the last 5 years. And throughout that time, and 3 years before that as well, 90% of our customers recommend us to a friend. And that's 90% of 17,500 houses at the moment. That gives us 5-star status. It's not a gimmick. It's dependent on 90% customer satisfaction. And we're very proud that we've delivered that growth without compromising on quality, as evidenced by our 5-star status. 95% of our units did not go to appeal last year. We're trying to do this by partnership. And we're the only volume house builder who's committed every single scheme will comply with Building for Life 12, which is the CABE and Design Council yardstick for residential design excellence. So you're getting a perception from Barratt, a perspective from Barratt. Might not be the same as from another house builder. Oh dear, that's it. Right. Years after local plans were introduced, some councils still haven't produced one. Others have produced a plan, but the policy hasn't tackled housing need. It was produced years ago, and it hasn't been touched since. We're left with a dusty document that is hopelessly out of date and irrelevant to the needs of communities. And there are those councils that have an up-to-date local plan but have failed to be honest about the level of need in their area. It's not good enough. The era of tolerating such poor performance is over. That's Sajid Javid yesterday to the Local Government Association conference. Now, he's putting the blame on local authorities fairly and squarely, it would seem. But Nick Forbes, the chairman of the Local Government Association, responded by saying that speech went down in the room like a bucket of cold sick. And he claimed that all the local authorities are proudly focused on delivering more housing to address the housing crisis. So whether it's national or whether it's local, we have a massive undersupply, so we need to look at that gap between words, actions, and outcomes. Now, the Secretary of State, I'm a planner, by the way, the Secretary of State really has 3 actions available. We've heard his words. He's got 3 actions available. He can invite local developers to submit applications to him if the developer doesn't trust the local authority to deal with it properly. He can call in plans where he doesn't trust the council to deliver enough housing. And he can take over the preparation of a local plan. So let's look at those three. Only one application ever has gone from a developer to the Secretary of State. And you know why? Because he refused it. In terms of calling in plans, he's called in for consideration 2 plans, Birmingham and Bradford. In both cases, because he thought they were producing too much housing. They were going to build on Greenbelt. And so he delayed the production of those 2 plans by 9 months each. Not the production of plans, actually, the delivery of homes for people who need homes. And he also has the power, as I said, to prepare his own plans. And it stated 2 years ago that the deadline for that was March 2017, and he would be preparing his own plans where he didn't trust the local authority to do it. That deadline passed without a whimper, without any action whatsoever. 41% of councils, 41% of councils have an adopted plan 5 years after MPPF, as we heard from Lucian. 6 out of 10 haven't done a plan 5 years. The thing was in draft for 2 years, so call it 7 years. Now, turning to local authorities, it's far too easy to generalise. 300 local authorities, 100 of them are brilliant. We don't want to deal with them every day of the week. They want to do plans, they want to deliver homes, they want to release enough land where homes will be delivered and where people want to live, and they want to work positively with house builders and social landlords to do that. There is 100 local authorities who, they're not that keen on doing something politically unpopular, which is housing, but they play by the rules. They prepare their plans. They get the plans adopted. The problem is sometimes the sites are in the wrong places. Sometimes they're over-optimistic on how much housing will be delivered. Sometimes they don't focus enough on the delivery of the plan as the writing of the plan. But they're doing a decent job. They're getting on with it. They're playing by the rules. And then there's 100 who don't want to build houses. They don't want to build houses. They game the system. They've gamed the system successfully for 40 years. And we're hearing lots of new policies. But, I hope I'm wrong. But I've got a feeling they might game the system for another 40 years. They're not bothered. The problem is those are the authorities where the affordability gap is greatest and the needs are greatest. Those authorities are an hour out of London. Those are the places where families cannot buy a home. But if you look at the demographic makeup of your average planning committee, maybe they like high house prices in that area, I don't know. But what has happened as a result of those 100 or so miscreant authorities? Lucian Cook told us, 90,000 less consents per year than needed. The highest need local authorities need 4 more large sites and 15 more small sites to be consented every year, each authority. Again in the Savills report. And local plans throughout the whole of England only actually plan for 88% of need. We've got a system that systemically builds in the under-delivery of housing. Barratt, we have 20,000 plots allocated for housing in a draft plan, but we can't build on them because they can't get the plan out. They're in Greenbelt, we can't put an application in. York hasn't had a plan since 1956. So for me, if the housing crisis is real, and I'm going to come back to that, we need a huge change in leadership attitudes within an hour of London and within 45 minutes of our great cities. And that's recognising that there isn't enough brownfield land to meet need. The best sites have gone. Trust me, we used to buy them. They're harder to come across. Families deserve homes as much as those looking for a city centre flat. Plans, when they are to be delivered, not written and then rewritten. I don't know. I know who's responsible for writing a local plan in most areas. I have no idea in any area who's responsible for delivering it. chief exec, leader, chief planner, policy officer. I don't know who to ring up and say you haven't delivered your plan. You're in the dock for it. So, 3 ideas to solve the housing crisis. First one, maybe we should stop calling it a housing crisis. Everyone in this room, we know there's a housing crisis. But how can it really be a crisis if there's no government crisis response? We saw what the government did when there was the run on Northern Rock. We saw what they did in the Mad Cow disaster, Torrey Canyon, and more recently at Grenfell Tower. But how can we call it a crisis when 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks or whatever, with a general election, and MPs were running for Parliament on a ticket of vote for me because I'll stop housing development? A crisis where everybody understands it's a crisis and rallies round to address it. They don't get elected on the basis of perpetuating it. Second one, Greenbelt. Thanks, Geeta. Introduced it well. I am the biggest supporter of Greenbelt in the UK. It's planning's biggest success story. It's why our great cities are better than any other of the great cities anywhere else in the world. It's part of the reason why Manchester's city centre regeneration has been so fantastic. Because they knew in the 80s, actually we need to focus on the city centre. But it was not meant to stop housing indefinitely, permanently. And it's time to look at 1, 2, 3% of green belts, which have doubled in size in the last 20 years, by the way. 1, 2, 3% of green belts, and say which are the worst bits that could be released to deliver much needed new homes. Edinburgh's a good city, isn't it? It's as good as most English cities. They've got a green belt, but it's not inviolate. If Edinburgh doesn't meet its housing needs, sites are released in Greenbelt around Edinburgh to meet those housing needs. I don't think it's harmed Edinburgh any worse than Nottingham or Manchester or Sheffield or Newcastle. If it's good enough for Edinburgh, I think it's good enough for English cities. The government needs to support the local authorities who are out there. Remember the 100 and the other 100? There's probably about 200 of them who are willing to be pragmatic about Greenbelt. The government needs to support them and not send messages, as it did at Birmingham and Bradford, that it will clamp down on any authority that is thinking of a pragmatic and proportionate approach to Greenbelt. And my final point, because I know the first 2 won't happen, so I thought I'd better come up with a realistic one, is, and again, a little bit annoying, Geeta, but I'm copying you, it's partnership, it's joint working. House builders and housing associations are going to have to work together more. Disagree, Geeta, but I think we build cheaper than you and I think we're better at selling than you. But we don't deliver the social outcomes and we don't have the patient capital that you have. We can work together, mixing those 2 things. Like Tom from Urban Splash has done with Places for People. Like we've done with London and Quadrant. We've all got to put the pedal to the metal on that. House builders and infrastructure providers. We've got to work together better. We can't have water companies stopping local plans getting adopted, stopping major developments, because they want us to pay for the infrastructure they're legally required to provide. House builders and local authorities, there's been enough said on that, but I agree with Geeta. I was as disappointed as anyone to see that backlash in Haringey, a Labour authority who promised that every tenant would get the same lease on a replacement property. But a huge outcry against them, which gives you a feel for the strength of feeling. And house builders and government. The last 2 years, I don't know what others have thought, but we used to have great relationships with government. They wanted to hear from us on how to deliver housing. That's been more difficult in the last 2 years. New housing minister, new administration, hope that'll change. 2 very final quick points. If you're going to focus on addressing the housing crisis, don't focus on irrelevant sideshows like house builders land banking. We do not. We are a fast asset turn business. As soon as I spend £1 on land, the whole business is under pressure to get a unit built and returned to the business. We don't build slowly. We build as fast as we can to the market. And when businesses consolidate, it's not with the aim of reducing output, it's with the aim of maximising output. And finally, final promise, certainty. We are more risk averse since the GFC. Our share price went from £12.50 to 50p. We are risk averse, trust me. So we need certainty. We need to know what's happened to Help to Buy. We need to know the policies in NPPF are going to stick for 10 years, not 5 years. And we need to know where the infrastructure is going to be and when it's going to be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you.